Now I'm going to take you through the basics of the CUBASE Mix Console, and you can get to the Mix Console again by typing F3 on your computer keyboard or by going to the Devices menu and selecting Mix Console from the list. But right now we're looking at the Mix Console, and there are several basic components of the Mix Console, and some of them are pretty easy to understand. And we talked about the first two in the last tutorial, which are the channel faders, which is the volume of each individual track, and the pan controls. So to adjust the volume of a channel, you just simply click and drag up and down on that fader. And then if you wanted to get it back to its 0 position, you can hold down the Control or Command button on your computer keyboard and click the fader, and that will get it back to its preset position. So all of the channel faders are located at the bottom of the Mix Console. And then you can use this scroll bar to scroll across so that you can see each individual channel. Now over on the left-hand side of the Mix Console, you may see these red color-coded faders. These are the input channels from your audio hardware or your audio interface. Now at this particular point in the project, chances are you're not going to be doing any additional recording, and therefore you won't need to see these input faders. So I'm going to go to the Filter Channel Types button right here and click on it, and this is where you can choose which channels on the Mix Console are currently visible. Right now, the All Channel Types button is highlighted, which means that we can see all of these different channel types, but I'm going to click on the Input Channels button, and you'll notice that now all of those red color-coded input faders are gone. And that will free up a little space here inside of the Mix Console. So now that we've hidden the input channels, we're looking at the drum channels first. So here's the kick drums and the snare drums and the hi-hats and so forth. And if I take that scroll bar and click and drag across, which you may not see me do every single time because I'm using an Apple Magic Mouse and I can actually move my finger left and right over the mouse. And so if I ever do that without using the scroll bar at the bottom, I'll let you know. In other words, if I said I'm going to scroll using my mouse wheel through the channel list down here at the bottom, I'll try and remember to explain that to you when I do it. But bear in mind, you may not see me go down to this scroll bar when you see the channels moving from left to right. Now also, every single channel has a mute and a solo button. So if you wanted to listen to just one individual channel, you would hit the solo button. And then you'll notice that on all of the other tracks, the mute button turns on. So right now, you'd be listening to just this individual track. Or conversely, if you wanted to not hear a channel, but hear all of the other channels, then you could mute individual tracks as well. So those are the mute and solo buttons. The pan control is pretty easy. You just simply click and drag it from left to right, and that moves it from the center position, or C position, which is mono. In other words, the signal coming out of that particular track is being delivered to each studio monitor equally, and therefore it's being distributed to the listener's ears equally, both in the left and right ear. So if you were to move the pan control further to the left, then you would be redirecting the spatial content of that track to the left speaker and the left ear, and anywhere in between. Same thing with the right channel. The further you push the pan control to the right, you'd hear more of that signal coming out of your right monitor and sending it therefore to the listener's right ear. And then very similarly to the channel fader, you can also get that pan control set back to its center position, which is the default position, by holding Control or Command on your computer keyboard and clicking with your mouse to get it back to center. Now, above the channel faders are the racks. These racks may look a little bit different on your computer, so let me show you how to get the racks visible if they're not currently visible on your computer. If you come over to the Select Racks button and click on it, you can see that there's all sorts of different racks that you can be looking at. Now, throughout this course, we're going to be using things like the inserts, possibly the pre-rack, definitely the equalizers or EQ rack, and also the channel strip and sends. So we don't necessarily need to be looking at the Q sends. So I'm going to disable those, and you'll see that the QSense rack has now been removed from the Mix console, and I'm going to turn on just the first 6 racks. So what we end up with is routing, pre, inserts, equalizers, channel strip, and sends. Those are the racks that we're going to be using throughout this course. And then you can click anywhere outside of that window to get back to the Mix console. Now, every single rack has an open and a closed state. So right now, the insert rack is open. See this area right here? We could use this area to choose different insert effects. But if we wanted to close the inserts rack, we click on the top rack. Now you'll notice that when I did that, it moved all of the other racks up in the list. So by opening or closing any rack, it's going to open and close that rack for all of the channels all at once. So for example, if we clicked on the routing rack, now we're looking at the routing of all of the channels. If I click on it again, it closes. If I go to the pre-rack, now I can see the pre-controls. And if I click on that rack again, it's going to close it. Here's the insert rack, EQ rack, strip, and also the sends. Now, a little later on, I'm going to be showing you how to use all of the controls inside of all of those racks. But finally, I want to describe a little bit about how the signal flows inside of the Mix console, because the Mix console is taking the signal from all of these channels, along with all of the processes that are happening inside of the racks, and sending that signal to the very last fader on the console, which is the all-important stereo output fader. This is the overall volume of the mix that you're going to be creating inside of your CUBASE project. So this is going to set the volume of the project when it gets sent to an audio CD or an MP3, and therefore also to the listener. So this fader is very, very important. All of the signal from all of those tracks and channels ends up at this stereo output fader. And if for some reason you can't see your stereo output fader, let me show you how you can get it back. If you come back under the Channel Types button and click on it, you might actually have the output channels disabled. And if you do, then you won't see your stereo output channel. So in this configuration, make sure that you can see everything except for the input channels. And that way you'll be able to see everything that I'm going to be using in this course. Now in the next section, I'm going to do some further preparations to our CUBASE project to make it much easier to mix.